they spent 25% less and they got 2% more cases. So all that 25% went to the bottom line, and then they increased their case volume as well.
Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Case Fuel Podcast. I'm your host, Jan Roos, and today I'm here with Josh Villareal from ACQ Inc. So Josh has been running traditional media agencies for the past number of years. He actually ended up scaling one up and selling it to FindLaw before starting ACQ, which is his current venture. We've done a lot of stuff in the realm of digital marketing, but I thought it was really important to have a guest on who has a lot of experience in the space, generating case files in a really predictable way that doesn't touch the internet whatsoever. So thanks and welcome to the show, Josh.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jan. Thanks for having me.
I like to get started with sort of the superhero origin stories. Do you mind telling me how you got to the point that you're out running the agency today?
I went to school and I was probably like everybody else trying to figure out what to study. So looking at my circle of influence, and my dad told me not to study architecture, so I marked that off the list. My cousin and my uncle worked in the industry, the advertising industry and public relations for some pretty big agencies out of Austin and Houston. It looked pretty sexy, so I decided to go with that. Studied communications with emphasis in advertising, which was more in school. It's more about kind of branding, and even there was this advertising competition that colleges compete in, and that was building a campaign for a big corporation. Coca-Cola was the client the year I did it. And then when I got out of school, my first job was actually as a junior media buyer for an agency in Houston, but it was more direct response. So once it had some sexiness to it in terms of the creative, but it was more so about the numbers and the science behind it, which they don't really teach you in school, but it's more important, in my opinion, than a sexy creative. Kind of worked my way up through the ranks in that agency from junior media buyer to a senior level. And in the meantime, we had kind of found a niche and started building some decent referrals and a good client base within the legal industry. Just mainly mass torts, but then we started getting into some other localized campaigns as well. And so we had actually approached a company, FindLaw, to acquire our agency. But that was back in the heyday of the transvaginal mesh mass tort, where everybody was spending a lot of money acquiring those cases. So that was a good year for us. They couldn't really scale it to the realm that they wanted it to. So after about 2 years, they switched gears and decided to go more of a lead gen model, which was good for me because I stayed on and worked as an affiliate manager. And it kind of taught me a lot about the digital space as well. So I kind of have a little bit of a unique perspective in working offline for about 10 years, but then also just taking a crash course in digital media from a legal perspective, a legal case generation perspective as well over the last 2 or 3 years. So I kind of have a little bit of a unique perspective, but I left FindLaw and started ACQ Inc. with my mentor, Keith Cohn, who's been in the game for a long, long time. He sold radio for about 10 years, so he knows a lot about traditional. And his background is actually in finance, so he looks at more return on investment. And that's how I kind of look at everything, marketing as an investment and what your return needs to be, and kind of working backwards and engineering a campaign that will achieve that. So yeah, I have ACQ Inc. And then I have Mass Marketing, which is just a small boutique shop that's more digital first and traditional second. ACQ is more TV, radio first, digital second.
All right, awesome. So Josh, there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things I want to dig into is this whole concept of direct response marketing. So obviously we're both marketing guys who run agencies. So this is kind of the stuff that guys like us will talk at the marketing events all day. But a lot of the times it's like you said, it's not the kind of stuff that you see in school. I always like to say, most people get a really bad idea of what's working in marketing when watching Super Bowl ads because, they think that you're going to say some funny story about a horse falling in love with a dog, and you think that's how you're going to market your law firm. So for the benefit of the practice owners and the managing partners that might not understand the difference between direct response and traditional branding, would you mind defining a little bit more like that and why it might be important for law firms?
So direct response, we kind of put it as you're eliciting a direct response from your advertising, whereas Super Bowl commercials and more branding type commercials, you can watch, 28 seconds of it and not know who the company is until the very end. Whereas direct response is hitting the pain points, telling the person about your firm and getting them to pick up the phone and call you, and then tracking that. So it's the commercial that basically tries to get somebody to pick up the phone and call.
I think it's really important because, there's a lot of stuff out there We had kind of a tough time personally, I did at least, when there's a whole social media craze and people were talking about getting their brand out there. And it seems like there's a big resurgence in brand marketing, and there's still some old standbys that are out there, selling law firms that honestly have no business trying to beat people in a branding perspective, paying huge retainers for this stuff. So, we constantly are seeing people getting their shirts taken off by this kind of stuff. But, the thing is that a lot of law firms, in my personal opinion, are in need of getting case files quickly. And direct response, I think is one of the best ways to do that. It's kind of interesting. I think in the whole realm of TV and radio, it seems to be kind of a niche in which a lot of branding stuff is taken first. So, people just try to get the jingle going or whatever. But, it's kind of interesting that you guys are taking more of a lead-based approach to that. So could you kind of tell us how you guys have been differentiating from traditional TV and radio agencies?
Yeah, for sure. So, you'll get some branding, and it's a byproduct of just frequency. So that you'll have some name recognition and stuff, but we don't base anything on brand awareness or anything like that. We just base it off phone calls and conversions into cases. So yeah, we kind of are a little bit different in just the aspect that we're not trying to do the whole Super Bowl commercial, like you mentioned, and make it more entertainment based. I read an article the other day that the people tune into the Super Bowl to watch the commercials, and it's the only time that people really tune into the commercials to see the commercials. So we differentiate ourselves from more traditional kind of Madison Avenue type agencies by just developing a brand through frequency. So what that means is the more times that you're on the air, and just the name itself will give you the brand awareness that you need to serve that purpose. But the main goal is to pick up the phone, have someone pick up the phone and call you and grow your case acquisition and have your lower your case acquisition as well, just from that perspective. So it's not so much about brand awareness and an entertainment factor. It's just more results driven and conversion based.
Gotcha. Yeah. So no, I totally vibe with that, Josh. And as far as the kind of metrics that we're talking about, so what are the, when you're going out and talking about a client about the success of a campaign, what kind of numbers are you guys focusing on? And also if you want to share what kind of results are coming from these campaigns, I'd be really interested to hear what's coming through.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to focus on just personal injury because that's kind of one of our main. We mostly focus on mass tort, class action, and personal injury. So I'll focus on just local market personal injury. So typically we try and generate a unique 30-second connected call for about $150. And then assuming an acquisition or a conversion into a signed retainer, we try and keep it around $1,500 per signed retainer. Now that's going to be different in multiple markets. Some were lower, some were higher. LA being one where it's probably going to be a bit higher. And we're actually having some success in Austin as well, where it'll be a little bit lower. So you just kind of have to play the market, look at the competition, and then you can kind of somewhat predict what your results are going to be. But that's kind of the main two is obviously the first kind of top of the funnel is the unique phone call, and then the conversion on the back end. And then also kind of knowing that some cases will fall out just after the records are ordered and whatnot. You may have some fallout there. So we'll take a look at how many calls are coming in, how many of those calls are converting into cases, and then kind of predict a fallout as well to kind of project an overall lifetime return on investment.
That brings up something that historically been kind of challenging with some of the clients that we've worked with, for example, but the actual ability to track how cases are getting through and being signed from the lead. Do you guys have a system for doing this, or what do you usually recommend clients to do in order to get a handle on these numbers?
We're talking to somebody in the intake department at least like once or twice a week just to see how things are progressing. We heavily utilize call intelligence as well. So there's 1,000 of them out there. We've used Dial 800 and CallRail as the two most recent ones, but there's several ones that serve the same purpose. And what that does is it just tracks every single phone call, regardless of if somebody hung up. And we've actually recovered some cases and some new clients by just setting up a basic missed call notification to ping somebody in intake. So if somebody calls, hangs up, intake person gets an email saying, hey, this person called but didn't speak to anybody. That person picks up the phone, calls that person back. This is, Melissa with the Smith Law Firm. Just, saw that you called. Can we help you? I mean, a lot of times that's a step that most firms don't take, but it's just all about that front end intake and make sure everything's buttoned up in that regard.
Yeah. And it's actually one of the things that I found super important. We did a great interview with intake specialist Gary Falkowitz. And, what I think is super attractive for this, and from the first part, the firms that really have a handle on these numbers, it's really the backbone for planning any sort of growth that you have in mind. So when you guys, if anyone finds out that, we can put $10,000 in this campaign, we can expect $50,000 to come out. and that's something that you can count on every single month, then it becomes a lot easier to make decisions about hiring associates, moving to a bigger office, investing more money in marketing if that's what people want to do. There's really no way to do that unless people end up getting a real handle on these numbers. And yeah, the second thing is the actual follow-up process is something that a lot of law firms struggle with. And again, it's like, we're talking about, in the instance of the stuff that we're typically doing, search advertising, there's nothing stopping for somebody from calling the next 2 listings on Google. Gary Falkowitz mentioned, you have to assume that somebody's going to call one person before you and one person after you. So if you happen to be the firm that ends up calling back or treating people a little bit better on the intake process, then you end up being the firm that ends up retaining the case. And what becomes really attractive about that is that, you mentioned the number 1 in 10. If somebody can get that number from 1 in 10 up to 1 in 5, then you're posting twice as many case files in the exact same marketing spend. So it's really something that people, I think, need to take a lot more focus on, and absolutely something I find super important. All right. So switching gears a little bit. So a lot of the times, TV and radio have been around for a long time. And in the marketing world, there's always something new. People tend to focus on whatever shiny, sexy object that they have in front of them. But, I estimate that TV and radio is still important. So you did mention, having the experience with running the digital practice as well. Do you see any sort of differences in the type of leads that are coming in, the scale within a given market? What's different about TV and radio, and why should people that are already considering other channels use it?
You need to look at what your investment's going to be. Just like anything, any advertising or marketing, there's no guarantee. So you have to be, okay investing a certain amount of money and maybe not getting anything back. But from a TV perspective, you're getting some byproduct branding as well. So if somebody sees you in a search results and they recall you from a radio or TV ad, that may increase click-through rate. We've had some studies done where just the brand searches. So if you look at kind of where people are coming to your site, just brand searches, somebody searching for the exact firm name and going to your site, that's increased with offline media as well. But yeah, the main thing is it's getting somebody to pick up the phone, and that's been, for the most part, converting higher than most web forms and more web form fills. I think it's just because there's a live person on the phone and you kind of miss that step of having to return that call from a form submission or from a chat box on the website. So it's just connecting a live person with a live person. And so that's somewhat helped our conversion as well. And it's a little bit more broad. You're getting a little bit more wider of an audience, where with pay-per-click, it's intent-based, and there may not be the search volume to get you a high case volume. But with TV and radio, the audience is fairly large, and you'll have some waste, no doubt. But with that large audience, you also get a higher volume of calls. And, assuming your conversion's up to snuff, you should be seeing some more cases too, more high volume.
Yeah, no, I definitely imagine that. We run up against limits with search volume all the time. And it's like, at the end of the day, we can't create any more demand than people are already pulling out their cell phones or, going on a desktop computer to search for stuff. But, you're kind of accessing this entire other universe of, people watching TV, people in their cars. Everyone knows somebody who just can't get a router set up in their house and still uses a flip phone for whatever reason. So, and those people have cases too. So it's definitely intriguing. So as far as a firm that might be considering this, what kind of firms have you seen this working really well for? And, what stage should a firm be at when they're considering doing something like TV and radio advertising?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing is just look at your service area, because I'm in Houston, Texas. And if you look at the DMA, the designated marketing area that most TV stations and radio stations cover, it's a huge area. I'm kind of closer to downtown, and the TV signal reaches like an hour and a half north, an hour and a half south. So if you're not looking to serve those people, if it's more kind of a lot of in-office, then it's probably not the best route. If you're just looking to kind of stay within like a 10-mile radius or something like that, then TV and radio is probably not for you. But from a practice perspective, personal injury, mass tort, class actions have done really, really well. And you see that on TV all the time in the daytime commercials and on the national television, on cable as well, with all the mesothelioma, defective drugs and devices. Currently, like Physiomesh, Invokana is kind of fizzling out. But there's a couple of big ones that you'll consistently see on TV, and that's very much a direct response geared game from a mass tort class action perspective. But there's been success that we've had in local markets with criminal, tax, family, bankruptcy, SSDI, workers' comp, med-mal, immigration. It's a lot of practice areas that we've had success with. But I'd say, you probably want to invest depending on the market. LA versus Louisville are two completely different markets. But from an investment perspective for TV and radio, I wouldn't go any less than, 15 to 20 a month, 15 to 20K a month, just to get a fair test. And you could probably assess after week 2 If you see some traction, don't expect results week 1, but week 2, you can kind of reassess and see it should be trending, the cost per call should be trending downwards, and you should have at least a case or two in that short period of time. Kind of the surface area is one thing you want to look at. Marketing budget, 15 to 20K a month is probably where I would start. You can obviously do it for less or for more, and you may have to in different markets. And then the intake portion as well. You have to make sure that you're staffed up, especially from a mass tort class action perspective, where you may have, super high volume with physio mesh, cost per call in the $60 to $70 range. So you're getting double the amount of calls for a PI campaign. So you have to make sure that you're staffed up. And with Gary Falkowitz and his group, we have after hours and kind of overflow as well. So we can set that up through call intelligence to kind of help streamline the intake. But that's a huge part of it as well. There's been firms, same campaign, pretty much same commercial, same spin, same everything, and have their cost per cases double the next guy just because they're not picking up the phones live or going to voicemail and they have to call them back. So I can't emphasize how important that is, not from just a TV perspective, but just from a general operations perspective as well. And you don't have to spend a ton of production out of the gate as well. So if you think about just the media costs, that 15 to 20K can include production. If you watch, national cable television, you'll see just the basic standard stock photos with words and just a voiceover. And funny enough, those usually outperform the ones that are kind of done up really, really nice. We had a campaign here in Houston where we were running just a basic graphic and word voiceover type ad. Just chugging along, but the client got a wild hair and said we need to do, these productions and go to this location and shoot live. And it ended up costing, $20,000 to $30,000 for all these commercials. And we put it on air, and the results went down. So we ended up putting the just straight kind of quote unquote ugly commercial back on the air, and it started chugging back exactly where it should. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on production out of the gate. Just kind of dip your toes in the water, book something for a month, and just see how that goes, and then reassess and regroup and adjust. But you have to. Basically, we were running a commercial that was just graphics and voiceover only. You've probably seen one in your local market or for a mass tort on cable television. And things were going well. The case acquisition cost was good. And this was for actually for first-party insurance claims after a storm. But we were just running the graphic ad with voiceover, and he kind of got a wild hair. His competitor was doing some production that was a little bit higher end, so he wanted to go that route. So we fired up a camera, got to some live shoots on location, had probably 6 or 7 different spots that were really, really well cut, well edited. And we put those on air, and sure enough, the results dwindled. And so we said, media is the same, the cost is the same, everything's the same. The only thing that changed was the production. And so we swapped it back to just the straight voiceover with graphics, and the results kind of fell back in line. So production value is somewhat overrated. It's kind of a means to an end. There's some people out there that spend a ton of money getting spokespeople in the market, famous athletes, whatnot, paying those guys, ridiculous sums of money for a retainer, and just, spending too much money on production. It's a means to an end, and you can just get a better sense without spending 20, 30 grand on production. I think our typical voiceover graphic commercial runs like $1,500, $2,000. So it's not expensive at all. And then radio, usually the stations will produce it for you. So there's no really money out of pocket for that as well.
That's actually super interesting because we kind of see some parallels in the web world. A lot of the times when people want to have like a really slick or sexy website, we've been testing a lot of this different stuff as well. And, we've got a template that's running. It looks ugly as sin. But if we can get 20 or 30% of the people that land on that site to page, it's, I like to say this. It's like, do you want your website to look pretty, or do you want your commercial to look pretty, or do you want your checking account to look pretty? And like most people will go for the second. And, that's really kind of the power of direct response, because it takes you out of this realm of I've had a lot of situations in past lives where it kind of becomes a creative headbutting contest. But, another power of the direct response thing is that you can just literally point to the numbers and say, look, this is what's working. This is what's not. So it's an objective, rational decision as opposed to, going based on feeling. Josh, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, do you have any like really big success stories, or like what does these campaigns look like in terms of the returns to a client when they go off really well?
We actually took over an account, a personal injury account in a local market. The firm was spending multi-six figures in the market, and they were just missing some of the key elements that we typically implement just in our whole direct response marketing system that we employ for law firms. So we came in, analyzed their media buy, cut quite a bit of waste off. So we look at all media off a cost per thousand, just because you can compare it across multiple mediums. You can't really compare a cost per point. which is just, a percentage of the population in a given market. You can't really analyze your CPM on TV versus, Facebook ad or what have you, because Facebook doesn't use cost per point, they use cost per thousand. So that's kind of the main metric that we use to kind of base our media buys from. And they were in some areas that were exorbitant in terms of cost per thousand. So we just transitioned some of those dollars just straight out of the marketing plan and actually lowered their spend by 25% the following year. And they got it wasn't a lot more cases, but it was like 2% more cases. So they spent 25% less and they got 2% more cases. So all that 25% went to the bottom line, and then they increased their case volume as well. So that was a personal injury firm in one market. And then market analysis and just kind of competitive analysis is something that's extremely important as well, especially if you're new to TV and radio in a market. Well, a lot of people will just go and try and butt heads with the 2 or 3 big players in the market. From a personal injury perspective, there's usually 2 or 3 that just completely dominate the television market, and usually one that outspins the next closest competitor by 2 to 1 or sometimes 4 to 1. And so they'll go in and they'll see them on TV all the time and they'll try and compete in that game. But what you can do is you can ask, one of your station reps or the agency may have access to it too, but there's a couple of different systems out there. Media Monitors is one, and there's Kantar is another one, where it'll actually give you the spend of your competitors, and you can actually request that they do by day part as well. So you can see not only where your competitors are spending in the market on what stations, but also what time of the day, and try and find a niche that you can play in where they're not spending that much money and the cost per thousand is where it needs to be in line, and just try that. A great example of that is in Texas. There's a market where very competitive on English TV, but we found just a niche on Hispanic radio, so Spanish radio, and brand new firm. And it's the cases are below $1,500 a case on a personal injury, a car accident case. Just because we found that niche, we did the market analysis, the competitor analysis, found a niche where not a lot of people were focusing, and just hit that hard. And that was one of the success stories as well. So it's kind of taking a step back, assessing the whole market, and then kind of actually having strategy, not just going and trying to say, okay, we're going to go on TV, so we need to be on the news because everybody watches the news, or we need to be on the number 1 station in morning drive because everybody's listening to morning drive. That's just not the best way to go. You have to be a little bit more strategic than that.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Like a lot of parallels that we see across different channels of marketing. But yeah, I know it's definitely important to have, somebody who kind of understand these different things to work with you because it's the thing. It's, it took years for you guys to figure out how to do this. And now this is something that people can work with. So if anyone's considering this, what kind of people are you looking to speak to, Josh? And what's the best place to find you online?
My email is just Josh, JOSH, at acqinc.com. That's A as in Alpha, C as in Charlie, Q as in Quebec, I as in Indigo, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And anybody that's currently, maybe they're advertising on TV and radio, but the results have kind of dwindled or they're not getting the returns that they want, I would gladly, hop on a quick call, see if we can't look at their campaign and see if we can't make some adjustments to that to kind of see if we can get it headed in the right direction. Or if somebody is interested in TV and radio in terms of acquiring cases in the local market and then also nationally. And one thing that I want to mention about national television advertising is people think it's super expensive, but it's actually a lot of times less expensive than local. Like a national Fox News commercial is actually probably just as expensive as a local news commercial on a New York CBS affiliate. So if you can go national, that's typically the way we push people. That's why mass tort and class action work really well in that regard. But yeah, anyone that's looking to acquire more cases in their market, we'll love to speak with them.
All right. Fantastic, Josh. So, it's been a really interesting discussion. I think for any listeners, it's always great to see, just how different channels work. There's some ideas that kind of fall across whatever kind of marketing you're doing. I think the focus on intake and making sure that people know their numbers and kind of taking that direct response mindset is something that, regardless of the channel, is something that people are going to be able to take advantage of. So I want to say thanks for providing all this awesome information, Josh. And for the rest of the listeners, thanks again for listening to the Case Fuel podcast, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.